Now the first of our panelists, our visiting expert that you've been waiting for is Tara Daun. She is the Wisconsin Farmers Union Director of Conservation and Stewardship. She's held that position for a few months, and for the 3 years previous to that, she had led 4 farmer-led cooperative groups that are farmers applying for grants to get money and then deciding how to prioritize the spending of that money in ways that are consistent with the health of our rivers and streams. You'll get some sense of that, a much better sense of that from her slides and her presentation. So now she's covering the whole state of Wisconsin for the Wisconsin Farmers Union, but she previously covered 4 groups in western Wisconsin, one of which is on the Dry Run Creek, which is a tributary of the Willow River. The Willow, of course, flows into the Hudson, and that's why flows into the St. Croix, and that's why Hudson is here, the confluence of those 2 rivers. So join me in giving a warm Rotary welcome to Tara Daun.
Thank you, everyone, for having me. I am a fast talker, so I'm going to do my best. Instead of coming up to me afterwards and saying, you're a really fast talker, if we make eye contact, just give me one of I'm like, yeah, breathing. I love it. So just buckle in, and I will do my best. They told me I had 15 minutes, and so then I was like, I got to teach them everything in 15 minutes. So I'm going to try to relax a little bit here. So Buck did a fabulous job of introducing me, so I won't give much further ado, but I wanted to give a quick roadmap of where we're going today. I want to talk about why agriculture. It's easy to forget when we are spending our time between metropolitan areas, why agriculture is important to water quality, what conservation agriculture looks like, what farmers are currently doing with conservation agriculture, why they're not doing more, which is a big question we get a lot of the time, and then how we get more to happen on farms. So number 1, why agriculture? So we call it agricultural pollution or nutrient loss non-point source pollution. Point source pollution is when you have a factory and a pipe and that goes into the river, right? It's a point that we can regulate. Non-point source pollution is you've got fields and then you put fertilizer on those fields. Some of that goes to the crops. Some of that doesn't go to the crops and ends up elsewhere in the environment. You can't pinpoint it, it's spread out, it's very difficult. So when we look at non-point source pollution, we see that agriculture is one of the biggest factors of that. This graph here is from the 2013 total maximum daily load study. I will not be quizzing you on this, but basically it's a big study that they do to explain what the load of nutrients, like the load of pollution that the river would just naturally be able to support, and then figure out where we are above that, and then what we would need to do to get closer to having a healthy river ecosystem. For Lake St. Croix, the nutrient of impairment, or the one that's causing the most trouble that puts us on the EPA's watch list, is phosphorus, which is a very common nutrient that we need for fertilizing crops. So it's a big deal. And as you can see, agriculture is really important to that. It's not a surprise because most of the acres in our watersheds here are agriculture. Despite how suburban sprawl is moving, still most of our land here is impacted by agriculture. And I work in 3 sub-watersheds of Lake St. Croix. The South Kinney, so South Kinnickinnick River that goes in, Dry Run, like Buck said, and then also the Horse Creek, which is way up in Polk County. All of those end up in Lake St. Croix, and so we are working on those sub-watersheds within. So according to the TMDL, like I said, agriculture is a big deal, and the reductions that we need to see from agriculture there are the biggest reductions that we like to see. I also wanted to throw in there, because it's a big deal, some of those nutrients are not just going to our surface waters. We have real concerns about groundwater as well from that. So our farmers are really aware of their impact here. We try to go in clear-eyed. It's very easy for people to want to say, it's not us, make the golf courses do something. And what about suburban lawns? We are very, very much, I really appreciate Einer's words, trying to internalize a sense of ethic and responsibility and going in clear-eyed, like there are improvements that we can make. I went the wrong direction. I would be remiss also if I didn't note that we actually have seen improvements in the past 30 years. When I first saw these numbers, I was a little bit like, wow, those are big deals. So we have cut erosion by 67% off of farms in the last 30 years. We've reduced our irrigation needs by 53%. We've decreased the amount of land that is going into a bushel of product by 30%. We've lowered energy use per bushel by 43%. We've reduced greenhouse gases by 36%. And we've increased production by 101% in 30 years. So agriculture has been making improvements, and that's really important for us to go in clear-eyed and acknowledging. I want to note, though, that if we're increasing production by 101%, but we're only decreasing all of those other factors by a lesser percent, we still have an increase in pollution, which is a thing that we need to be aware of and that we're walking in clear-eyed too. I also want to say that this is from the Field to Market report. I did a lot of research on this when I heard these statistics because I was like, are we sure? And looking at everybody who co-signed on this and reading through the study, I was very impressed. And at the end there, I saw the National Farmers Union, and I was like, oh, I support it completely. I'm an employee of the Farmers Union, and I have absolutely drank their Kool-Aid. So I do believe that we are making real strides, and we are seeing farmers take responsibility, but there is a huge mandate for producing enough to support our populations and to keep our farms thriving and surviving. So what does this look like? Where is the problem coming from? It's mostly what we talk about is soil loss. So when we see erosion, all of these fields, some people are like, yeah, that's what farming looks like. This is not a good thing. Something has gone awry when you see this off of your fields. And when the soil is running off of your fields, obviously you get sediment problems, which if you live on a lake, you know about sediment. If you live in a local river or next to a ditch, you know sediment isn't great. But with the sediment also combined into that and also dissolved into the water that's running off are dissolved nutrients. Some of those are from fertilizer, some of those are from plants. We get a lot of this from forested land too. There's just nutrients in soil where we grow plants. So that's problematic for us. You can see it in winter too. Actually, our biggest runoff seasons are our shoulder seasons where there's not something on the field growing. So we call this snert. When you see snow and dirt combined, you've learned a word today. This is actually from Pierce County, just up the road from me. So we do see real soil loss, and these are the worst seasons where we see the most nutrients entering our watersheds. So what the impact this is, obviously you guys know at the bottom of the watershed next to the rivers and lakes, the downstream effects. But this is also problematic at the top of the watershed up in the fields too. This is a farm in Boyceville, the pasture that you can see here with the cattle in it, beautiful Highland cattle from one of our farmer members. That's been in pasture for about 100 years since the land was colonized, basically. Where Millie, the dog, is sitting down there for scale, obviously, that there has been farmed conventionally for about 100 years. When we see slopes like this, I also have a profile shot of this, but it doesn't include Millie, so why have a picture without a dog in it? You can actually see that grass line is up to the waist. So we've actually lost about 3 feet of soil off of that field. We don't see natural slopes like this without erosion or something happening, disturbing it in a natural ecosystem. So in 100 years, we've lost 3 feet of topsoil off this field. Still a highly productive field. We're using engineering synthetic inputs, doing all sorts of great farming work to make sure we're still producing. But that soil loss really means something. The most valuable thing on most farms is that topsoil. And so we're seeing real losses. So I always tell people this because we have a real interest in farming in conservation. I am known for my pumpkin speech, so I'm going to give it to you guys really quick because we often have people saying environment or economy, right? Farming or natural land, all of those things. They think that we're working in terms of compromise, right? And I really have never experienced that in the 3+ years that I've been working with farmers directly through here, and more than that in the rest of my career. What I have seen is that farmers also want clean water. There's obviously, right? There's no farmer out there twisting his mustache going, I'm going to poison the watershed today, Marge, right? There's no one who does that. There are no people who are like, yeah, I just don't think we should even have farming. Turn it all back into natural land. I'll starve. That's not a thing either, right? So anybody who thinks that these are at odds, that's not the case. So my pumpkin example here is, say I have 2 daughters. They come up to me and they say, I want this pumpkin, right? And so what's the obvious answer? Oh, you guys both want the same thing? What do I do? King Solomon it, right? Pumpkin in half, you both get half. Now both kids are like, that sucks. That's not what I wanted at all. And you go, why? You got half a pumpkin. And they go, I wanted to make a jack-o'-lantern. I can't make a jack-o'-lantern with full pumpkin. Go to the other kid. She goes, I wanted to make trail mix. I wanted to bake the seeds. And I can't, I know I have half of what I wanted. If I had taken a second, right, to say, why do you want this pumpkin? One says, I want a jack-o'-lantern. One says she wants seeds. Oh, well, actually, you guys can just work together because you have to get those seeds out to make that jack-o'-lantern, and you need to get rid of that hole to make those seeds, right? We can do that. And people might say, well, that's Pollyannish, or, you know, sometimes both people just want a jack-o'-lantern. Sure, I would remind them that pumpkins grow and there's a ton of seeds. We can get there, right? But taking an extra point to understand what people's values are, what they're trying to do, is often exactly what we need to do. It just takes a little bit more time and a little bit more listening. And that's what we find with our watersheds here and our farmers. We're creating win-win situations where we know the farmers don't like the erosion and we know that the communities don't like the erosion. You can't grow crops in a lake, right? So we know that something has to change and everybody has a value to see that. Erosion control is flood control. Erosion control is sediment control. Erosion control is water quality protection and soil resiliency to climatic factors. You want to talk to my farmers now? They agree they need to be resilient to climate because we have 2 years of drought that they're coming out into a season where it rains every 12 hours. Very different crop needs, and their fields need to be able to combat both of those. So what do those win-win solutions look like? Everybody's got a different idea, but we just call it soil health, right? And there's 3 principles to this conservation agriculture thing. I'm going to run through them really fast. Thank you for putting up with me. Number 1, minimize mechanical disturbance. So what that means is when anybody thinks about farming, they think about tilling or plowing or running haul. I work for the Farmers Union. We got a big old plow right there in our logo. I used to work for the Soil Conservation Service, Natural Resource Conservation Service. Big old plow right in the logo. I'm like, you guys, we got to stop. We need a new symbol because plowing and farming are considered tight, right? They are considered the first thing that you have to do. We have more and more farmers who are starting to practice no-till. This is a huge mindset shift for a lot of people because what we're asking them to do is go through and knife those seeds right into the soil and then close the trench up behind them. You have residue on top. It's not as pretty. A lot of my farmers, the first thing they did on the farm when they were 15, run the plow. Are they even a farmer if they're not plowing? This is a big mindset shift. But every time we plow that soil, every time we loosen it up for the seed bed, we are loosening it up for wind and water erosion, right? It's becoming vulnerable. So we're working with our farmers to understand how can we still farm? How can we still do this productively? We can save them money, right? We can save them gas by not doing it, but we got to make sure we grow a crop. So our farmers are working on that. Number 2, permanent soil organic cover. This is very tricky. Corn grows 108 days a year. Up here, that's the varieties that we get. 108 days does not make a full year of coverage, right? So our farmers are trying to figure out how can we still grow the crops that the market wants us to grow while adding more cover and protecting our soils for more of the years. So they're coming up with payments that they can give farmers to do cover crops, which is a seed that they plant in the soil right before they harvest or right after they harvest, so it's growing through the winter, through those really vulnerable seasons when there's nothing there. We also have farmers who are trying to incorporate full season cover. So you might have heard of Kernza Fest, everything coming up. We're trying to get more crops that stay on the soil instead of being harvested and ripped out every year. Number 3 is species diversification. Soil health and soil biology is all about the microbiome. Okay, so what makes healthy soil is all of those critters living in it, adding life and adding resilience to it. When we only have corn or corn and soybeans, which is a lot of the landscape out there, we are not giving that microbiology much to eat. And if something goes wrong with them, they don't have anything else to fall back on. So adding diversity is a huge deal. We don't have any natural ecosystems in the world that are thriving with just 2 species, right? It's usually hundreds in a natural ecosystem, or at least a dozen. So our farmers are working on what they can do to add that diversity back in. So along with that, they are doing some studies. This is Dennis Bush out of UW-Platteville. He's out standing in his field working on what this actually looks like. So we have some fabulous farmers who are running trials up in Polk County, up by New Richmond, where they have 5-way plots comparing that cover crop and no-till to what we call conventional farming, which I call naked dirt farming. You are seeing the real losses. And Dennis's research is really interesting. He's simulating rainfall, so he has full control over how long it rains, and we know how much falls there. And my abbreviations here are not awesome for the average person to read, but the second column there says NT with cereal rye, so that's our cover crop with no tillage. They are taking in, that's 90% of the water that fell on that ground was infiltrated, versus 34% on the far right, which is our conventional till without cover crops. So we're saving 3 times as much rainwater directly onto the field. That means that it is not even leaving. It's banked up for that drought that came later that year. It is super helpful, and it's protecting every ditch and stream. You want to talk flood control? Talk about creating infiltration in your soil. It's a huge deal. I want to also point out that 10% still did run off, right? Compared to 66% in the conventional plot. So 1/5, less than 1/6, the runoff that we're getting is leaving. And when we look at how much actually sediment was in there, because there was so much less, it couldn't build up that exponential force of pulling more and more sediment with it. So we have 2% the soil loss in our fields where our farmers are practicing these soil health practices. I see this stuff, I'm like, it's real, you guys, it matters. We can talk about the principles all we want, but we're really seeing these changes coming into the field. So our farmers are taking this data and trying to figure out how to make it work. So just in 2022, I apologize, that's a little old because priorities and figuring out my 2023 stats hasn't come through yet. But in 2022, my 4 watersheds of small groups of farmers were planting 3,500 acres of cover crops that they directly paid for. We had a lot more of that happening in the watershed. You can see the other stats here, but at the end of the day, it was 2 million pounds of sediment that just 12, 15 farmers were able to help produce, so prevent from leaving their fields. The fabulous staff at Polk County does a study every year where they drive through the entire Horse Creek watershed and look at every field that they can see from the road to see if it had cover crops and what the tillage practices were. They've been doing this since 2016. May the Lord keep and bless them, because I'm so grateful for this data. But as you can see, we are trending in the right direction. This is about a 17,000 acre watershed of agricultural acres, and we're still at less than 5,000. So we're still little over 20% in no-till, about 16% in cover crops. We've got a ways to go in adoption of this, but I'm really glad to see that we're trending in the right direction. And I know it's because of the efforts of our farmers to try this stuff, get out the word, and share really good data. There's also practical considerations. You can't grow potatoes without tillage. You know, there are things that we're never going to get to 100%, but we can do quite a bit. I also wanted to let you guys know, because nobody's kicking me off stage yet, this is what no-till can look like. It is not what we're used to. When you see that stubble in between the rows, that's a farmer who didn't till that year, and they're leaving it there for residue management. It's a whole practical consideration. Talk about running equipment through this. You got to change your mindset. You got to learn some stuff. But this is, when you see fields like this, you can go, oh, that farmer's doing something. When you see green fields in March, when you drive through and you're like, what is growing out there? That's a farmer who spent money on seed just to protect their soil. So it is a whole set of management issues, and you can see it from the road, but most of us wouldn't necessarily recognize it. Okay, really quick. Our farmers can see this. They like the ideas. And as I said, no one's trying to poison the watershed. So why are we not up at 60% adoption, right? Why are we seeing more? There's common excuses. You can read them there, but I'm going to get to the underlying issues. Number one, this is not the way that we have farmed before. For generations, like I said, the sign of farming is tillage. The sign of farming is a beautiful black field with those green rows growing right before it, looking really clean, right? So we have limited experience and therefore limited proof of local success. Change is also really costly and scary. I think I'm talking to a lot of business owners here. Every time you switch software, oh, good Lord, right, in your business, it takes a huge amount of bandwidth and a long term to really get that going. When you are working in a seasonal time frame, every opportunity that you have to learn, to reiterate, is 1 year apart. Because you're planting this year, oh, there were some mistakes. Hopefully we clean it up next year. That is a long transition process that gets drawn out. So that's change is scary and hard. Like I said, there's marketing constraints. It is hard for our farmers to add diversity when they can only sell corn and soybeans at the local co-ops, right? It is tricky for us to figure out what we can do when we are limited by economic powers. And then there's debt constraints. Almost every farmer here, I think my dad was a business owner and a Rotarian. I don't think that he had to take out $100,000 plus, much more than actual operating loan every year to keep his business running, right? Farmers have to do that. So they have to have very tight relationships with their bankers. If you make a change to your operation that's pretty inherent, your banker has to think that that's a good idea. So even figuring out what that looks like is a really hard thing. So if you know someone in lending, we're trying to talk more with them to explain how you're going to save, you've got a more resilient farm when you take these practices on. But it's not the standard, so it's a scary thing to take up. And then we have the supply limits. This couple of years ago when we had some higher prices of iron and everything was like getting equipment was a real challenge for our farmers. So we're trying to help them through, but there's a lot of those practical considerations. The last thing is exhaustion and antipathy, right? So farmers are tired. They have decision fatigue. There's all sorts of stuff that they have to do every day with farm management. Also, occasionally, someone might come up and be like, "You're poisoning the water with all your chemicals," and walk away. And they'll be like, "What? I'm feeding the world. Are you saying my grandfather was a Like, it happens. And those comments stick with the farmers for 20 years plus. I hear about comments that were made in 2001 from farmers. They are not interested in hearing advice from someone who wants to clean up the water if the lead is, "You're a bad person and your life's work is a sham." Like, it does not work. It is, please, nobody do that. I love your rules for what to say. Is it truthful? Does it? But I think we also can definitely lead with, "I heard that this was a poison. How could you use that pesticide?" And it puts people in a defensive mode. It puts people in a feeling that they are being misunderstood. And while they're also trying to serve, right? And not making a lot of money doing it. So it is very tricky to go forward to someone and say, "Hi, I'm here about the water." And they'll go, "I don't even want to. Just don't even talk to me. I got a farm to run. I got kids to feed. I got to do my stuff." And so then we have to go, "Oh yeah, for sure. Me too. I actually understand farming. Let's talk about this together." And it's a really big deal. So how a non-farmer can help. If you own farmland and rent it out, you're called a non-operating landowner. There's more that you can do than this slide. Come talk to me afterwards. But how the average citizen who doesn't own farmland can make big impacts here. Number one, I strongly encourage everybody. Has anybody here bought local meat from a farmer before? Bought a half cow? That's awesome. Okay, if you are buying grass-fed beef that was raised on pasture in your watershed, you are 100% protecting your water. That if you are having pastures instead of crop fields, that is all of our soil health goals right there. That's diversity. That's full coverage all the time. That's limited mechanical disturbance. There's all sorts of great stuff happening. So if you want to protect Lake St. Croix, buy beef that was raised in Lake St. Croix. And you're helping a farmer too. You're doing all sorts of great things for local rural economies. It's really great. You can purchase a CSA membership. CSAs are community supported agriculture. So these are small farms that are growing vegetables and actual food that goes directly from the field to your plate, right? This is a big deal. We've got a ton here in St. Croix County and surrounding counties. So if you're interested, check out our farmers union or I can connect you with them. I've never met a CSA farmer that didn't have an ethic strongly tied to the environment. They really, really care. Eat at local food restaurants and then eat diverse grains. You know, you see those 7-grain chips. I see those at the store now and I'm like, diversity, we're making new markets. So you see kerns at the store. When you buy that, the market responds. And if you think, well, what is one person? I encourage you to look at organics, right? Organic food has been around for 20 plus years with the certification. We have farmers who have made it their lifeblood and made huge impacts because the consumer said that it mattered. The next thing, of course, as I said, there's these huge systemic issues, right? And so supporting conservation programs that support farmers are a huge deal. I would be remiss to not mention the Farmers Union. We have stewardship and pro-farm built right into everything that we do. But there's also policy at the local, state, and federal level. So St. Croix County Land and Water has a department in Baldwin. They are fantastic, and they provide technical services to farmers to help them reduce erosion practices through engineering. You can connect to them. You can have your county board support them with full funding and full staff. It's a really big deal. And I would say there's nothing better for local conservation than helping those departments. There's one in every county. DACAP, the Department of Ag, Trade, and Consumer Protection, provides our farmer-led groups these grants of $20,000 to $40,000 per year. We have 47 groups across the state now of these farmer-led groups trying to protect these waters. And that's because DACAP's program has been there to help plug them. EPA regulations and their services go to the DNR, and they provide us with the data that they need and the funding to get that data. So again, how the EPA is funded and what they do is what comes directly back to these local groups. And then the USDA, it's a big deal. I would be remiss if I didn't notice that the Department of Agriculture and all of their policies strongly affect what we're doing. Someday we'll have a farm bill. Not this year. And then the other thing I already mentioned, pay attention to the conversation that you're having with farmers and hear what they're saying. Like I said, going in with accusations and telling people what they're doing wrong is not helpful, right? You're not going to move the conversation forward. You can often move it backward for people like me trying to have that conversation. But also we can learn a lot from the farmers. They have practical experience on the landscape. They know what works and what doesn't. You want to see someone who knows how to engineer a stream bank or clean up a river? Farmers have the equipment and experience doing that. So there's a lot to be learned from them. Okay, Buck is going to shoot me because I took so long, but this is my information. This is me with some underwear. I didn't have time to explain. We bury underwear in fields. You can see me at a lot of tables to explain to farmers and show them how their soil health is actively affecting how their soils are reacting through their practices. Please feel free to take a picture. You can call, text, or email me. I'm happy to talk with folks to answer questions and provide resources to anybody. The WisconsinFarmersUnion.com is where you can find information on supporting local farmers. And if you just want more information on connecting to our watersheds, farmerledwatershed.org, or you can just follow us on Facebook for pictures of farmers with underwear, which is a whole thing. Thank you. That's great.
Well, wasn't that something? That's a host of facts in a hurry. I'm sure you're going to have lots of questions, so feel free to email them directly to Tara or give them to me, and we'll look up the answers later if we don't know. After the next presentation that I'm going to give you, you'll have even more questions, I suppose. So I think we ought to have a kind of like a seventh inning stretch. So everybody stand up. Yep, and raise your arms and take a deep breath. All right, and now sit down. And now let's talk about some urban stuff. Oh, and did you understand that picture? Well, John is pulling up the next set of slides. That the microbiota, the little bitty, you need a microscope to see them. That's why they're called microbiota. Those little living things live in healthy soil, and so they will eat up cotton. And those are cotton underpants, and they're full of holes because the microbiota has consumed them. And if it gets that much eaten up in 1 year, that means it's a particularly healthy soil, right? If it takes 2 or 3 years to get to that stage, that's 2 months, Tara says. That's very healthy soil. So that's the progression from a fiber to a nutrient. It might be helpful to say something about the word nutrient. Normally when we talk about nutrients, we think they're all good. We're talking about what people eat, what we feed our dogs. Nutrients are things that help us to grow better, right? In the world of water quality, surface water quality primarily, nutrient is stuff like phosphorus or nitrogen that makes plants grow in the water, that makes duckweed grow on the surface, that makes algae grow on the surface. Though that presence of nutrients is not a good thing. When plants grow in water excessively because there's too much nutrient, the plants grow to a stage, they die, they sink, they absorb oxygen from the water, and that's a bad thing. So we need to do a shift when we use the word nutrient in the context of surface water health. Now, the speaker you should have had today is Mike Mroz. He's the Public Works Director and Parks Director of the City of Hudson and has been for several years. He got sick yesterday and isn't able to be here today, so instead you've got me. But he had prepared his slides in advance, and so I think you'll find most of the slides are self-explanatory if we spend a moment looking at them. So stormwater management, and I include melted snow along with rainfall, is a factor that must be dealt with at the municipal level, principally in places that have streets with curbs on them. Where there are streets and curbs, there are usually rain gutters also, and that collection then moves to a nearby river. Here in the city of Hudson, the receiving waters are Lake Malick on the Willow River and the St. Croix. There are outfalls, as they call them, sewers that connect from those storm sewers to those rivers, and they are point sources. Remember, Tara pointed out the difference between point sources and non-point sources. Point sources are regulated under the overarching Clean Waters Act of the national government. 1968 legislation created the Clean Waters Act and regulates point sources. Non-point sources are not regulated, and that's why the farmer-led councils are an answer in that area. So why is stormwater management important? Well, Mike says it's important to collect and manage pollutants before they reach our natural waterways. Of course, the runoff from the streets also contributes to flooding. It contributes to erosion. For instance, when the water is running high in the St. Croix, those of you who are riparian landowners along the St. Croix know that you tend to have higher rates of bank erosion, water washing out from under the roots of the trees that grow next to the rivers when the water is running high. Flooding leads to that condition. So management of water that's coming from sources like city streets is important for local flooding. And then we have the small ecosystems issues. The city is subject to laws that pertain to impairing conditions in the St. Croix River because the WPDS stands for Wisconsin, or wastewater plant. I'm going to skip that one. Thanks. We'll get Mike in here. The TMDL is an agreed-upon goal of the total maximum daily load. It's analogous to the carrying ability, like with a park. How many folks can a park handle without the park being degraded? How much phosphorus or nitrogen can the St. Croix River handle without being impaired? That's its total maximum daily load. With a lot of science that can be calculated and developed, and we've done that kind of thing. The scientists have done that kind of thing with the St. Croix River and developed TMDL standards and reduction standards in order to keep the river and its associated biota from degradation. So Wisconsin has rules. When Hudson reached a city population of 10,000, it became subject to the MS4 regulations, Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System. Yep. And so the city has for years now, several years now, had a requirement to deal with its surface water and to do things like public outreach and other activities. And one of the things that the city is doing is helping out with a variety of public education and outreach activities. It's a part of a larger group, a consortium. The city is supportive of RiverFest. The city pays to have the Toonies performance that we had last night for the kids, and has done that every year since it became subject to the MS4 regulations. The city supports Earth Day and other activities. Of course, the city also tries to find, detect, and deal with any inappropriate discharges, chemical waste, and other stuff like that. So they look for bad stuff coming out of sewer outfalls. That bottom picture there would be what one of the city's outfalls from the storm sewers system would look like, and it looks like there's something coming out of that low flow situation there that's readily identifiable by its color as something that ought not to be there. The city also has its septic water treatment. That's the sewage plant, and that's the one that collects water from insides of buildings, not from the streets. Many years ago, the two systems used to be the same, but then they were separated as a result of the Clean Water Act. So starting into the 70s and 80s, there was a major movement all over the United States to separate stormwater or external sources from internal sources. The stuff that goes through the sewage plant may from time to time have nasty chemicals in it. For instance, a manufacturing plant that has something that they need to get rid of. But that is handled in an entirely different way and usually treated as close to the source as possible. The stuff that can get into the stormwater system, the street system, had come out looking like this discharge from the end of a pipe is difficult to treat. But I think there's a slide here that will deal with one of the ways that it can be captured and treated. So the city has an ordinance, naturally, and one of the aspects of the ordinance is dealing with construction sites. So whenever there's construction and a site is in excess of 1 acre, then it is subject to that ordinance, and that's why you see these low plastic black fabrics stretched around construction sites. That's part of the way of keeping construction site runoff from getting directly into our rivers. Great, thanks, Julie. Here's a typical construction site. I don't know just exactly what it is, but it was something that was built in Hudson, and when the plans were submitted to the city, they also contained plans for dealing with the runoff on the site. Here are some other things the city does on a routine basis. Actually, when leaves go down the storm sewers, they carry quite a bit of phosphorus with them. And so catching leaves before they go down the sewers is a great idea. That's why you see curbside. And here are some tips about what we can do. Oh, look at that dog moving right along. Here are some other things that urban dwellers, people who live in areas that have streets with sewer and gutter, can do. Nice 10-point list of things that can be done. These principles apply in the areas that don't have curb and gutter. it takes longer for the pollutants to reach a riverway in a rural area, but it'll get there eventually, simply because there's a basic rule that everything flows downhill. And it may only, some bit of pollutant, let's say some motor oil dripped on a street, may only move 2 feet in 1 year, another 2 feet the next year, another 2 feet. You know, eventually it gets into a receiving water body. So there's a great principle. And I thank Mike for his wonderful slides. Wish he could be here because he's a far more dynamic speaker than I am. And for you ladies, a heck of a lot better to look at than I am. So, side benefit. Today we're being filmed, you know, so Nate Skoog will turn this into a YouTube and he'll show it on Infinity TV so that you can look at it in the future. You can recommend it to your friends. If we do this again next year or something analogous to this, we'll try to find a location where that'll be easier for the public to be at, so we can reach a wider audience in that fashion. Now, I don't think we have time for questions, as we need to leave. We crammed a lot in there, didn't we? Is anybody still... No. It's all important stuff. There wasn't a single bit of it that was a waste of anybody's time. So that's good. But as you think about these topics and you have questions, feel free to direct them to Tara or to me, and we earnestly want to answer your questions and help you understand the big picture and your part in it. So